Welcome to Old Calm Historian, your serene sanctuary where the stories of the past gently unfold. Listen closely. The soft crackle of a warm fire blends perfectly with the calm background, creating a space that soothes your mind and eases your soul. With a gentle and comforting voice guiding you, let yourself drift through time, discovering forgotten tales and timeless memories in perfect tranquility. If this peaceful journey resonates with you, please subscribe and join our community of calm explorers. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let the gentle fire and soothing stories carry you into the past. The film opens on a sweeping landscape, stretching endlessly under the pale light of dawn. A quiet mist hangs over dense forests, while the faint outline of mountains presses against the horizon. The air is still, broken only by the distant call of a bird echoing across the valley. Slowly, the camera begins to move forward, revealing the wild terrain as if the audience has been dropped into a forgotten age. There are no cities, no roads, no trace of modern convenience, only the untouched wilderness of a world where survival meant more than comfort. And every sunrise was both a blessing and a challenge. The narration begins in a calm but resonant voice, guiding the viewer into the past. It explains that long before the luxuries of electricity, running water, or even basic tools of industry, human beings had to rely entirely on their instincts, on shared wisdom, and on techniques passed down from countless generations. These were not tricks born from books or laboratories, but from centuries of trial, error, and observation. This was survival in its rawest form, the world of our ancestors, who thrived in conditions that would easily overwhelm most of us today. The camera shifts to a close-up of a man's hands, rough, calloused, strong from years of labor. They are carefully striking two stones together, sparks leaping into the shadows of a small clearing. The narration describes how fire-making was one of the earliest and most vital survival skills. For ancient people, fire was more than warmth. It was safety from predators, a tool for cooking, a signal for communication, and even a spiritual symbol of life itself. To make fire without modern tools required deep patience and precision. Our ancestors studied which stones produced sparks, how different types of wood caught flame, and the best fibers to gather as tinder. This knowledge wasn't written. It was lived, practiced, and memorized. The scene widens, showing a group of families gathered around as the first flame takes hold. Children watch with awe as smoke rises and a tiny ember glows. The older members of the group teach them how to nurture it gently, feeding it with dried grasses and thin twigs until the flame grows into something steady and powerful. The narrator explains that these moments were lessons. Fire was not merely a physical force, but a cultural inheritance. Losing the ability to make fire meant risking death in the cold or starvation when food could not be eaten raw. To us today, fire seems simple, striking a lighter, turning on a stove. But to our ancestors, it was a triumph over nature itself. The film then moves to the wilderness beyond the fire circle. A man and woman are shown gathering plants along the forest floor, carefully inspecting leaves and roots. The narration describes how survival also depended on an intimate knowledge of plants. Every forest, meadow, and riverbank offered food, medicine, and materials, but only to those who could recognize them. The wrong root could mean poison. The wrong leaf could mean death. Our ancestors carried a mental library of plant knowledge: when to harvest berries, how to grind bark into flour, how to create poultices for wounds, how to recognize which mushrooms were deadly and which were edible. This was science, without laboratories, botany born from necessity and memory. The scene slows as the camera captures their process in detail. The way hands brush against leaves, the way roots are dug carefully with sticks, the way bundles of herbs are tied with strips of bark. The narrator reminds us that this knowledge was passed from parent to child, generation to generation, often in stories, songs, or rituals. Forgetting these lessons wasn't an option. Life depended on remembering. The film now transitions to hunting. The camera follows a group of men as they move silently through the undergrowth, each footstep careful and deliberate. They carry simple spears and bows crafted from wood and sinew. Their eyes are sharp, scanning every movement in the trees. The narration explains that survival required not just weapons, but the art of patience. Early hunters knew the habits of animals as intimately as we know traffic lights and schedules today. They learned to track footprints in the soil, to read broken branches, to listen for distant calls. They knew migration patterns, nesting seasons, and which animals could be approached and which had to be avoided at all costs. The hunters pause at the sight of deer grazing in a clearing. The camera lingers on the way they coordinate silently, using hand signals to position themselves. The narration emphasizes that hunting was rarely reckless. It was calculated, precise, and often spiritual. To kill was not merely to eat. It was an act of respect, of balance between human and nature. Every part of the animal was used: meat for food, hide for clothing, bones for tools, sinew for string. Nothing was wasted, because waste meant weakness, and weakness meant danger. The next sequence shows women back at the settlement preparing a meal. The meat from a recent hunt is cut with stone knives, while others grind grains into powder using smooth rocks. Fire crackles nearby as clay pots are positioned over the flames. The narrator explains that cooking was itself a survival trick. It made food safer, more digestible, and more nourishing. The discovery of cooking transformed human health, allowing stronger bodies and sharper minds. Over time, cooking techniques became as important as hunting itself. The scene gradually expands, showing the rhythm of daily survival, weaving baskets from reeds, sharpening tools on stone, teaching children how to carry water from the river. Each small act is survival embodied, each gesture a thread in the fabric of endurance. The narrator reflects that these practices may seem ordinary, but they represent extraordinary resilience. Without them, human life would have vanished long ago. Night falls in the wilderness. The camera pulls back to reveal a glowing circle of firelight surrounded by figures huddled close. Voices murmur in low tones, and the rhythm of a simple drum echoes softly. The narrator's voice lowers, carrying a sense of reverence. Here in the stillness of the night, survival becomes more than just food and fire. It becomes community. It becomes memory. Around the fire, stories are told. Stories of hunts, of ancestors, of gods and spirits. These stories were not mere entertainment. They were lessons, coded knowledge meant to guide and protect. In every myth, in every tale, there was a survival trick hidden, a reminder of what to do when the world turned harsh. As the camera drifts upward into the night sky, stars burn brightly overhead, untainted by the glow of cities. The narrator reminds us that even the stars themselves were survival tools. Long before maps and compasses, humans navigated by constellations, knowing how to find their way across deserts, forests, and oceans by reading the heavens. To our ancestors, the sky was not distant. It was a guide, a lifeline, an eternal map written in light. The scene closes with silence. The fire flickers, faces glow, the wilderness stretches endless and wild. The voice of the narrator settles on one final thought, that everything we take for granted today, food, warmth, shelter, medicine, was once the hard-earned product of skill, wisdom, and unbreakable determination. These were the tricks that kept our ancestors alive, and without them, we would not be here to tell their story. The screen fades to black, preparing for the journey into deeper chapters of forgotten survival. The camera fades in from darkness, revealing the first light of morning breaking over the wilderness once again. The fire from the previous night still glows faintly in the settlement's center, embers smoldering like the heartbeat of the community. Around it, small shelters of branches, leaves, and hides stand scattered, humble yet ingenious creations against the raw elements. The narration begins softly, reminding us that for our ancestors, fire was only one piece of survival. Shelter was the next crucial step, for without protection from the wind, the rain, and the relentless cold, no human could endure for long. The camera moves closer to one shelter under construction. A woman bends down, gathering long branches, her motions deliberate. A man is tying them together with strips of animal sinew. Children help by carrying leaves, reeds, and moss. Slowly, the structure takes form, a frame of sticks lashed together, layered with foliage to insulate against rain and wind. The narrator explains that early humans learned to read the environment not just for food, but for materials. Trees were more than scenery. They were walls, roofs, and foundations. Grass was not only for animals. It was bedding, thatching, even rope. Stone was not just a weapon. It was anchor and protection. Every element of the wilderness carried the potential to be shaped into safety. The scene shifts to show various types of shelters, some simple lean-tos against fallen trees, others dome-shaped huts made of woven branches. Still others dug partly into the earth itself for insulation. The narration continues. These shelters were not permanent cities, but they were lifelines. In colder climates, caves offered warmth and stability, while in open plains, nomadic families built temporary huts that could be abandoned and rebuilt elsewhere. Each design was a response to the environment, a language of adaptation carved into wood and stone. The camera lingers on the details, hands pressing mud into cracks to seal out the wind, hides stretched over frames to keep out the rain, smoke holes carefully left in roofs so fire could burn inside without suffocating the family. The narrator reflects that such ingenuity might seem primitive compared to concrete and steel, but it was brilliant in its simplicity. These were not just shelters. They were lessons in resilience, proof that humans could bend nature without breaking it. From the shelter, the camera follows a young boy carrying a woven basket toward the river. His bare feet splash lightly against the muddy banks as he dips the basket into the water. The narrator speaks of another vital survival skill: water gathering and purification. For ancient people, water was life, yet it could also carry unseen dangers. Streams and rivers provided hydration, but also sickness if consumed carelessly. Through trial and error, our ancestors learned methods to make water safer, allowing it to settle so dirt would sink, filtering it through sand and charcoal, or boiling it over fire when containers became advanced enough. To us, turning on a tap is effortless, but for them, every sip was the result of knowledge earned through hardship. The camera cuts to women pounding nuts and seeds with stone mortars, mixing them with water into a thick paste. Others grind roots into powder, their rhythmic motions echoing like a heartbeat. The narrator explains that food was not always found as simple meat or berries. Many plants were inedible until processed, ground, soaked, or cooked to release their nutrients and remove toxins. This was science in its purest form, experimentation guided by survival. A bitter nut might kill if eaten raw, but once soaked in running water for days, it became safe and nourishing. Our ancestors carried these secrets as sacred, knowing that forgetting them meant famine. The scene widens to show a group of men crafting tools near the settlement. They sit around a flat stone, carefully shaping flint into sharp blades. Sparks fly as edges are chipped, transforming ordinary rock into knives, scrapers, and spearheads. The narrator speaks of the birth of technology, not in factories but in human hands. The shaping of stone was one of humanity's greatest breakthroughs, giving people the ability to cut, carve, and build with far greater precision than bare hands allowed. Every strike of stone against stone was an act of invention, each shard carrying the potential to change survival itself. The camera slows, focusing on the process, a hand selecting the right kind of stone, the sound of sharp cracks as flakes break away, the satisfaction of holding a newly sharpened edge. The narrator explains that tool-making was more than craft. It was memory made tangible. Fathers taught sons, mothers taught daughters, and soon entire communities carried shared expertise. Over generations, this knowledge grew, spreading from tribe to tribe, shaping the destiny of the species. From tools, the scene transitions to the hunt once more, but this time not for large animals. A group of children is seen digging in the earth with sticks, uncovering insects, worms, and small roots. They laugh as they collect them into baskets. The narrator reminds us that survival was not always about grand hunts or heroic moments. Often, it was about gathering the small, the overlooked, the humble. Insects, nuts, wild grains, even tree bark, all were food when survival demanded it. Nothing was too small to be ignored. In the wilderness, sustenance came from everywhere. The camera now follows a group of women weaving baskets from reeds collected near the river. Their fingers move quickly, instinctively, creating tight patterns that can carry food, water, or even hot stones used for cooking. The narrator explains that weaving was another survival trick, a way of transforming fragile plants into strong containers. This art required patience and vision, seeing not just what a reed was, but what it could become. Through weaving, humans learned to carry, to store, to organize, and in doing so, they extended their ability to survive. The scene shifts again, showing a storm rolling over the forest. Wind howls, rain lashes against the shelters. Inside, families huddle close around fire pits, their shelters holding firm against the elements. The narrator speaks of the constant struggle against nature's fury. Storms, floods, droughts, and cold snaps tested every skill, every bit of knowledge. Those who had prepared, who had built strong shelters, gathered enough food, kept fire alive, survived. Those who had not perished. Survival was not a matter of chance, but of readiness. As the storm passes, the camera pans to the aftermath. Fallen branches, soaked ground, yet the people endure. Children chase one another in the wet grass, laughter breaking the silence. The narrator reflects that survival was not only about hardship, but about spirit. Joy, play, song, these too were survival tricks, giving strength to hearts weary from labor. A people who could laugh in the storm's wake were a people who would endure another day. The camera then drifts upward, revealing a vast landscape of forests, rivers, and mountains. The narrator's voice deepens. All around, nature was both enemy and ally, offering life while demanding respect. Every tree, every stone, every drop of water carried a lesson. To ignore them meant death. To understand them meant life. This was the wisdom of our ancestors, written not in books, but in scars, in stories, and in the rhythm of survival itself. The scene closes on the image of a woman telling a story to children by the fire, her hands gesturing as shadows dance across their faces. The narrator whispers the truth that every story carried knowledge, every tale a survival code. The children listen, their eyes wide, their futures shaped by the words of those who came before. And as the fire burns into the night, we are reminded that humanity's greatest trick of survival was not fire, not shelter, not even food. It was memory, passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that the wisdom of the past would never be lost to the wilderness. Fade to black. The screen opens once again on the untouched wilderness, but this time the camera does not rise with dawn. Instead, it sinks into the heart of the settlement at dusk. The sky glows with a palette of crimson and violet. The horizon ablaze with the fire of a setting sun. Shadows stretch long across the land, and the air carries the scent of earth cooling after a day's warmth. The narrator's voice returns, calm yet heavy with reverence. When survival depended not on individuals, but on the strength of the community, humanity began to weave its most powerful tool: cooperation. No single hand could build fire, shelter, and food all at once. Alone, a person might endure a few days. Together, they could endure for generations. The camera glides through the settlement, showing families gathered in small clusters. A group of women sort roots and berries, separating edible from poisonous. Men return from the hunt, carrying not just meat but bones, hides, and sinew. Children run between them, carrying small bundles of sticks for firewood, mimicking the motions of adults as if preparing for their own roles in survival. The narration continues. Cooperation was not instinct alone. It was learned, practiced, and perfected. Early humans developed unspoken rules: who guarded the camp, who foraged, who hunted, who tended the fire. Leadership emerged not from force, but from wisdom: the elder who knew the safest river crossings, the woman who knew which herbs healed wounds, the hunter who could read the tracks of animals better than anyone else. These were the first leaders, not kings or chiefs, but guides whose knowledge kept their people alive. The camera shifts to a close-up of an elder woman kneeling beside a sick child. Her hands move gently as she places crushed leaves and bark onto a wound, binding it with strips of cloth made from softened fibers. Smoke rises from a small fire nearby, where herbs smolder in the flames, filling the air with their scent. The narrator explains this was medicine before medicine, knowledge distilled through centuries of observation. Which plants eased fever, which soothed pain, which drew poison from a wound. The wrong choice meant death. The right choice meant healing. It was not written in books but carried in memory, sung in chants, whispered in rituals. The scene expands to show the role of ritual itself. Around the fire, figures dance slowly, their bodies painted with natural pigments, reds from ochre, whites from ash, blacks from charcoal. The drumbeat is simple but steady, echoing like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The narrator explains that survival was never only physical, it was spiritual. In the darkness of a wild world, people sought meaning. They turned storms into the voices of spirits, the sun into a god of warmth, the moon into a protector of the night. These beliefs were not mere superstition, they were survival guides encoded in story. A myth about a sacred tree might be a reminder of which fruit was safe to eat. A tale about a river spirit might be a warning about dangerous waters. Through myth and ritual, knowledge became memory, and memory became culture. The camera follows hunters preparing for a large expedition. They sit in silence, sharpening spears, testing bowstrings, painting marks onto their faces. The narrator describes how great hunts were both survival and ceremony. The tribe understood the stakes. Failure meant hunger, success meant feasting. Before leaving, they made offerings, a piece of meat placed into the fire, a whispered prayer into the night. These acts were more than faith. They were unity, reminding each hunter that they carried not only weapons, but the hopes of their people. The film cuts to the deep forest where the hunt unfolds. Shadows move between trees, the hunters stalking their prey. Suddenly, a wild boar crashes through the undergrowth. The chase is fierce, chaotic, yet controlled. Spears fly, shouts echo, the ground shakes beneath pounding hooves. Finally, the animal falls. The hunters gather not in celebration, but in solemn respect. One kneels, touching the fallen creature's head, murmuring words of thanks. The narrator reflects, in taking life, they honored it, for waste was sin, and gratitude was survival's creed. The scene transitions to the feast that follows. Families gather around fires, meat roasting, laughter and song rising into the night. Children listen to elders tell stories of past hunts, of ancestors who taught the ways of fire, shelter, and food. The narrator speaks. This was the true strength of humanity, not merely the ability to hunt, but the ability to remember, to teach, to bind generations together through words. Fire cooked food, but story cooked wisdom. The camera now shifts to the changing seasons. Snow blankets the forest, the settlement huddled against the cold. The narrator explains that survival was not the same in every season. Winter demanded planning. Meat dried and stored, hides sewn into clothing, shelters reinforced against storms. The people gathered close, conserving heat, singing songs to pass the long nights. In spring, rivers swelled with fish, and new plants sprouted, bringing fresh hope after months of scarcity. In summer, berries ripened and hunts grew more fruitful. In autumn, preparations for winter began anew, the cycle unending. The camera lingers on the hands of a woman stitching hides into a cloak, on a man laying strips of dried meat into a woven basket, on children learning to trap small animals with simple snares. The narrator reminds us, every season carried its own survival tricks, each learned through failure and perseverance. The scene grows quieter as night falls once more. The fire burns at the center, faces glowing in its light. The elder raises a hand and silence falls. She begins to speak, not of the hunt, not of food, but of the stars. The camera lifts upward, showing the night sky ablaze with constellations. She points, naming shapes, telling the children how one star leads north, how another marks the coming of the rains. The narrator whispers, "This was astronomy before telescopes, navigation before compasses." The heavens were a map written for those who could read it, guiding them across deserts, seas, and endless forests. The final moments of the scene return to the fire. The elder finishes her tale, the children's eyes heavy with sleep, their faces painted with wonder. The narrator's voice lowers to a near whisper. Survival was never only about strength of body. It was strength of memory, of spirit, of community. Fire burned the night, but stories lit the mind. And it is through those stories, passed down across endless nights, that the wisdom of our ancestors still burns within us today. The fire crackles, sparks rising into the night sky as the camera pulls back. The settlement glows like a fragile island of light in an ocean of darkness. Fade to black. The screen fades in slowly from black. Dawn breaks over the wilderness once again, but this dawn is not calm. The sky is heavy with dark clouds, and the sound of distant thunder rumbles across the valley. The camera moves through the forest where the settlement is bracing for the day ahead. Voices rise, hurried and tense. Children are gathered close to the fires, while men and women move with urgency, reinforcing shelters, stacking stones, checking weapons. The narrator's voice enters, deep and steady. For every gift the world gave our ancestors, it demanded a price. For every harvest there was famine, for every hunt there was danger, and for every tribe there was another tribe, sometimes ally, sometimes rival, sometimes enemy. Survival was never a quiet story. It was written in storms, in hunger, and in blood. The camera lingers on hands tightening ropes around a shelter frame, others laying sharpened stakes in the ground. A group of men sit in a circle, painting lines of ash across their faces, while women weave nets and repair baskets. The narrator explains that as human groups grew in number, competition for food and land became inevitable. Some encounters were peaceful, sharing knowledge, exchanging food, joining together in greater strength. Others ended in violence, and in these moments, humanity discovered another survival trick: defense. The scene shifts to a wide shot of the settlement, surrounded by wooden stakes driven into the ground like a primitive wall. Smoke rises from cooking fires inside, but on the edges, spears and stones are stacked, ready. Children watch from behind their mothers as the hunters prepare. The narrator speaks. Weapons were not only for hunting animals, but also for protecting one's people. The same spear that felled a deer could defend against strangers. The same fire that warmed the tribe could be a weapon to keep invaders away. The camera cuts to a distant ridge where shadows move. Another group, another tribe, watching from afar. The narration continues. The wilderness was not only filled with predators of fur and fang, but predators that looked like one's own reflection. Yet even in conflict, lessons were learned. When to fight, when to flee, when to seek peace. These decisions shaped not only survival, but the beginnings of strategy, of diplomacy, of law. The tension breaks as the storm rolls in. Wind howls through the trees, rain lashes against the shelters, lightning splits the sky. The people huddle close, clutching each other, praying to unseen spirits. The narrator explains, storms were more than weather. They were reminders of how small humans truly were. In the face of thunder and flood, even the strongest hunters bowed. The storm passes, leaving the ground soaked, the river swollen, trees fallen across the camp. Yet the people endure, rising once more to repair, to rebuild, to adapt. The scene shifts to a brighter moment. The camera follows a group of women and children to the riverside, where they scatter seeds across a patch of soil. The narrator says, "Here lies another secret of survival, the first seeds of agriculture." At first it was accidental. A dropped grain sprouted near a fire pit. A fruit discarded grew into a tree. Over time, our ancestors saw patterns, that plants could be encouraged, guided, multiplied. Slowly, the wild forest began to yield to small clearings, tended by human hands. The camera shows sprouts pushing through soil, women watering them with hollowed gourds, children guarding them from birds. The narrator reflects, agriculture was not an invention, but a discovery, born of patience and observation. It was the beginning of control, of changing the land itself to meet human need. With it came stability, food that could be stored, shared, and relied upon when the hunt failed. But it also brought new challenges, guarding fields, storing harvests, surviving when crops withered. Yet from this fragile balance, civilization itself would one day grow. The camera moves to the settlement's interior, where people are drying strips of meat over smoke, burying baskets of nuts in the cool earth, sealing clay pots with mud. The narrator explains the importance of food preservation. Fresh meat spoiled quickly, but dried meat lasted through the winter. Roots and grains could be hidden underground, safe from animals. Smoke and salt became invisible guardians, extending life beyond the moment of harvest. To forget these tricks meant hunger. To remember them meant survival. The next sequence shows a group of hunters and gatherers returning from the forest, carrying not just food but pigments: red ochre, yellow clay, black charcoal. The narrator speaks. Survival was more than the body. It was the mind, the memory, the need to express. On a cave wall nearby, the camera reveals drawings, lines of hunters chasing animals, circles of fire, handprints pressed into stone. These were not idle marks. They were records, messages, warnings, prayers. The first language was not spoken, but painted in ash and blood. The camera lingers on a child pressing a hand into wet ochre, leaving a mark on the wall. The narrator whispers, "Here, in these marks, is the first memory beyond memory, stories that outlived the storyteller, knowledge that survived when voices fell silent." This was humanity's greatest trick, the ability to pass wisdom not only through word of mouth, but through symbol, lasting for ages. The film shifts once again, following a small hunting party as they move across the plains. But this hunt is different. The camera shows them not chasing animals, but following a herd from a distance, watching their movements. The narrator explains, over time, humans learned not just to hunt animals, but to live with them. Dogs, wolves drawn by firelight became allies. Herds of goats and sheep, once prey, became companions. Their milk and wool added to survival. Slowly, domestication began, an unspoken pact between species, changing the course of human history forever. The camera cuts to night. Around the fire, the community gathers, their faces painted by the glow. A man rises, speaking slowly, gesturing with his hands. Others nod, some respond with their own gestures, their own sounds. The narrator reflects, language was being born. At first, it was signs and cries, mimicry of animals, the rhythm of drums. But soon, sounds carried meaning, meaning carried memory, and memory carried across generations. From these humble beginnings, words would one day build cities, empires, and dreams. The scene draws toward its end. The camera pulls back, showing the settlement as a fragile island of light amid endless darkness. The narrator's voice deepens. Survival was never one trick, never one skill. It was the weaving together of many threads: fire, shelter, food, medicine, memory, community. Each alone was fragile. Together they became strength, and it is through this tapestry, woven by countless generations, that humanity endured. The final shot rises high above the valley, showing rivers, forests, mountains, and the faint glow of firelight. Lightning flickers on the horizon, stars glimmer above, and in between, humans stand small but unyielding. The screen fades slowly to black. The screen fades in from black. Dawn casts a golden light across the settlement, highlighting the intricate patterns of daily life. Families move with purpose, but there is a new rhythm, one of shared responsibility, of collective memory, of social structure beginning to take form. The narrator begins in a calm, resonant voice. Human survival was never simply a matter of strength or cunning. It was the creation of society, a structure built from necessity, cooperation, and wisdom. Long before cities or kingdoms, humans discovered that rules, shared understanding, and communal effort were as vital as fire or food. The camera follows a group of elders seated on large flat stones, facing the community. Around them, children sit quietly, observing. The elders speak in low tones, gesturing to hunters returning with food, women distributing provisions, and children helping to carry water. The narrator explains that early humans developed social codes not from written law, but from necessity. Sharing food, allocating labor, caring for the sick and injured, these were the earliest forms of justice and fairness. Those who hoarded, stole, or disrupted the group risked exile, or worse, death. A man steps forward, speaking with authority, pointing to a damaged shelter and calling for volunteers to repair it. Others nod, some rise, and the group moves together with coordinated effort. The narrator reflects, leadership in early human communities was earned through knowledge, skill, and the ability to unify people. The first leaders were guides, protectors, and teachers, those whose experience could keep the group alive. There were no crowns or titles, only respect earned through action. The camera shifts to a circle of women and children by the riverbank. They are singing a call and response song as they pound grains into meal. The narrator says, music and rhythm were more than entertainment. They structured work, coordinated effort, and bound communities together. The beat of drums, the echo of voices across the water, the repetition of simple melodies, all these strengthen memory and reinforced lessons about survival. From when to plant seeds to how to track animal migration. The scene expands to show a young boy and girl drawing on a cave wall with ochre and charcoal. They sketch a hunting scene, noting tracks and animal behavior. The narrator explains that these were the earliest forms of communication and record-keeping. Symbolic thinking, art, and notation allowed knowledge to outlast individual memory. A hunt remembered could guide a generation decades later. A medicinal herb recorded in pigment could save lives long after the discoverer was gone. The camera lingers on a woman grinding herbs, placing poultices on wounds and explaining the process to a child. The narrator speaks. The understanding of plants, water, and minerals became the foundation of early medicine. Willow bark, for example, contained compounds that reduced fever and pain. Clays and poultices could draw infection from wounds. Observation, trial, and intergenerational instruction ensured that vital knowledge survived. Those who could identify medicinal plants, treat injuries, and manage illness became invaluable to their communities. A new sequence shows a ritual at dusk. Figures dance in a circle, hands raised, bodies painted with natural pigments. The camera pans slowly over masks made of bone, shells, and leaves. The narrator explains that early spiritual beliefs served practical survival functions. Spirits, gods, and sacred rituals encoded social norms, environmental wisdom, and ethical lessons. A story of a river deity might warn against drowning hazards. A tale of a forest spirit might teach respect for certain trees or plants. These were morality and survival lessons wrapped in myth. The camera follows a group of men constructing simple stone alignments, which the narrator identifies as early astronomical markers. Some stones point toward the rising sun at solstice, others toward notable constellations. The narrator explains, knowledge of the stars was not idle curiosity. It guided seasonal migrations, planting, and hunting. Early humans learned to track the movement of the sun and moon, predicting changes in weather and animal behavior. Observation of the sky became a tool of survival, science, and culture simultaneously. The scene moves to a communal fire at night. Elders tell stories of ancestors, hunts, great storms, and migrations. Children listen wide-eyed. The narrator says, storytelling was the earliest form of education. Lessons about fire, water, shelter, and animal behavior were passed through narrative. Each tale reinforced memory, taught ethical codes, and inspired courage. To forget these stories meant vulnerability. To remember them meant strength. The camera cuts to women weaving baskets, men crafting tools, and children mimicking both tasks. The narrator explains that art, craft, and skill sharing were essential. Learning to weave, carve, shape stone, and sew hides ensured that practical knowledge was preserved. Every act was both survival and education. Skills were encoded in hands, not paper. Memory was embodied in work, not in books. The scene shifts to the changing seasons. In winter, families huddle in shelters, wrapping themselves in fur and bark. Food is rationed carefully, fires kept alive, and elders remind the group of lessons learned during previous winters. In spring, new growth brings fresh challenges, unpredictable weather, new predators, and the need to adapt. The narrator emphasizes that these cycles reinforced long-term planning. Early humans learned to store surplus, rotate hunting grounds, and adapt labor to seasonal rhythms. A dramatic sequence shows hunters tracking a migrating herd. They study prints, broken branches, and droppings. The narrator explains that tracking animals required observation, patience, and knowledge of migration patterns. Hunters were both scientists and strategists, applying knowledge of ecology long before it had a name. They calculated risks, planned ambushes, and ensured that every part of the animal was used. meat for food, hide for clothing, bones for tools, sinew for string. Nothing was wasted. The camera returns to a communal feast. Families sit in a circle, sharing meat, berries, and roots. Children imitate the elders in cutting, cooking, and distributing food. The narrator states, community feasts reinforced social cohesion. Food was not just nourishment. It was a medium of trust, fairness, and mutual support. Generosity and reciprocity were encoded into survival strategies, ensuring that no member of the group was left behind. The final moments focus on the night sky. Elders teach children to navigate by the stars, telling stories of constellations, seasons, and omens. The narrator concludes, every tool, every fire, every story, every mark on a wall, every ritual dance and song was a thread in the tapestry of survival. Humanity endured not because it was strongest, but because it remembered, because it shared, because it adapted. Every lesson learned by one generation became the inheritance of the next. And it is through these threads, woven from knowledge, memory, cooperation, and reverence for the world, that we stand today, the inheritors of a wisdom written in the stars, in stone, in fire, and in the hearts of our ancestors. The camera rises slowly, showing rivers, forests, mountains, and the faint glow of settlement fires scattered across the landscape. Lightning flickers in the distance, stars shine above, and the wilderness stretches endlessly. The screen fades slowly to black, preparing the audience for the next chapter of human survival and discovery. The scene opens slowly on a vast river valley, bathed in the early morning light. Mist rises from the water, curling around trees and reeds. The camera pans over flat plains, where small clearings reveal the beginnings of permanent human settlements. Huts, larger and more organized than ever before, form clusters, suggesting cooperation on a larger scale. Smoke rises steadily from clay hearths, signaling the daily rhythm of human activity. The narrator begins, calm and reverent. For thousands of years, humanity moved across the wilderness, following game, water, and the seasons. But slowly, a new idea took root. Stay in one place. Tend the land, plant the seeds, and nurture life from the earth itself. This was the beginning of settled life, the birth of villages, and the first steps toward civilization. The camera moves through one of these early villages. Children carry water from the river in small baskets. Women grind grains into flour, and men repair tools or reinforce walls of woven reeds and mud. The narrator explains that the shift from nomadic hunting-gathering to sedentary life allowed humans to produce more reliable food. Cultivation of wheat, barley, and legumes became common. They planted in rotation, dug irrigation channels, and learned to protect crops from flooding or pests. A sequence follows a woman demonstrating seed selection to a group of younger villagers. She separates grains that are plump, removing shriveled or damaged seeds. The narrator emphasizes that this knowledge, which seeds would germinate best, which soils would yield most, was passed down carefully, forming the first agricultural science. Over time, families developed surplus food, which could be stored for winter or traded with neighboring settlements. Storage silos and underground pits become visible in the camera frame, sealed with clay to keep out moisture and rodents. The camera shifts to a man teaching young hunters the patterns of wild animals that still roamed the region. Even in settled life, hunting remained crucial. The narrator explains that this balance between domesticated crops and wild resources was essential. Humans learned which animals could coexist with their crops, which needed to be managed or avoided, and which were useful for food, clothing, or tools. Every action was calculated, informed by observation, memory, and tradition. Next, the camera explores the village perimeter, where wooden palisades and thorn barriers mark early defensive measures. The narrator notes that as settlements grew, conflict became inevitable, not only with wildlife, but with other human groups. Defense was learned as a survival necessity. Villagers rotated night watches, sharpened spears, and coordinated communal strategies for safety. Leadership became more complex, often situational. One elder might guide during a hunt, another during floods, another during conflict. This adaptability ensured that knowledge was shared and survival optimized. The scene then shifts to communal labor. Villagers are shown building large structures, houses with mud-plastered walls, platforms for grain storage, and clay ovens for baking. The camera focuses on hands mixing mud with straw, pounding clay into bricks, weaving reeds into walls. The narrator highlights that these acts of construction were more than functional. They were educational. Every laborer learned new skills, passing them to the next generation. Knowledge was becoming codified, embodied in craft and work. The camera moves to a sacred area of the village, a circle of stones surrounding a fire pit. Women and men participate in ritual dances, their bodies painted with natural pigments, shells and bones decorating their necks. The narrator explains that religion and spirituality continued to serve practical purposes. Rituals encoded lessons about seasons, the fertility of crops, the behavior of animals, and respect for natural forces. Prayers to sun, rain, and river spirits were also ways to focus collective attention on vital survival tasks. Festivals reinforced social cohesion, teaching cooperation, fairness, and shared responsibility. The scene transitions to early artistry. Children mimic elders by carving simple tools or painting symbols on clay tablets. The narrator notes that artistic expression, from cave walls to figurines, had multiple functions. Some served as records of hunts or astronomical events. Others acted as talismans for fertility, health, or protection. Art became both survival and culture, reinforcing knowledge, moral lessons, and identity across generations. The camera pans to a communal meal. Families gather to share bread, legumes, roasted grains, and hunted meat. Elders instruct the children in portions, explaining which foods are safest or most nourishing. The narrator emphasizes that this system of shared food distribution was a cornerstone of social stability. In early villages, fairness and cooperation were literally a matter of life and death. Those who could negotiate sharing, mediate disputes, and maintain harmony became invaluable leaders. Next, the camera follows villagers tending small irrigation channels and terraces along the riverbank. Water is carefully directed to grain plots and gardens, demonstrating an understanding of hydrology, soil fertility, and seasonal rainfall. The narrator explains that this knowledge represented early environmental engineering. It required observation, experimentation, and documentation, initially oral, later symbolic. Villagers adapted techniques to prevent soil erosion, maximize yield, and maintain biodiversity. The scene shifts to nightfall. Torches line the pathways as villagers gather for storytelling, song, and drum beats. The narrator notes that these cultural activities were essential for memory and communication. Stories encoded lessons about survival, laws, ethics, and relationships. Songs helped synchronize labor, maintain social bonds, and pass down history. Drumming communicated across distances, signaling danger or celebration. Every ritual and artistic act served multiple survival functions simultaneously. A dramatic sequence shows a storm approaching. Villagers brace their shelters, secure stored grain, and herd livestock to higher ground. The narrator explains that early settlements were vulnerable to natural disasters. Floods, droughts, or predator attacks required careful planning, collective action, and rapid adaptation. Knowledge of weather patterns, landscape, and animal behavior allowed humans to survive and thrive despite these challenges. The camera then focuses on early trade. Villagers exchange surplus grain, shells, pigments, and stone tools with neighboring settlements. The narrator reflects that this trade expanded not only material resources, but also knowledge, techniques, and social bonds. Trade routes became networks of survival wisdom, linking communities across valleys, rivers, and mountains. The final moments of the scene return to the settlement at night. Fires burn in every home, laughter and conversation drift across the village, and elders continue teaching the children through story and example. The narrator concludes, "The first permanent settlements were more than homes. They were classrooms, laboratories, theaters, and sanctuaries. Here, humans learned to plant, hunt, build, heal, govern, and create. Every stone wall, every hearth, every ritual, every song, every story was a thread in the tapestry of survival. It is here, in these villages of the distant past, that humanity first began to shape not only the land, but its own destiny. The camera rises high above the valley, showing rivers, fields, forests, and settlements stretching into the horizon. Stars begin to appear in the night sky, firelight flickers below, and the wilderness beyond seems vast, yet conquered in small, deliberate steps. Fade to black. The film opens with the camera gliding slowly over an immense river valley. The sun glitters across its waters, revealing fertile plains stretching endlessly toward the horizon. At first, there are clusters of huts, but as the camera pushes forward, something new emerges. Structures rising larger than simple shelters, walls of mud brick and stone, wide streets filled with movement. The narrator's voice, low and resonant, begins to guide. From villages of farmers and hunters, humanity took its next step. Surplus food, stronger tools, and growing numbers gave birth to something never seen before: cities. With them came new challenges, new dangers, and new triumphs. Here, among river valleys and fertile plains, the foundations of civilization were laid. The camera weaves through the heart of a city in its early stages. Markets hum with activity. Farmers bring baskets of grain. Fishermen carry nets heavy with their catch. Potters display clay vessels decorated with simple but striking designs. Children chase one another down narrow streets, while dogs and goats wander between stalls. The narrator explains, surplus harvests allowed humans to specialize. Not every hand was needed in the fields anymore. Some became potters, weavers, builders, traders, or priests. This diversification of labor was the heartbeat of the first cities. A slow pan shows towering walls built of sun-dried brick, manned by guards with spears and shields. The narrator reflects that protection became vital. As food and goods accumulated, so did the risk of raids from outsiders. War, once a clash between small groups, became organized. Strategy, weapons, and defenses evolved. The city was both sanctuary and target, a beacon of progress and a magnet for conflict. The scene shifts to the interior of a temple-like structure. Tall columns rise from a stone base, its walls decorated with primitive carvings of the sun, moon, and rivers. Priests in simple robes conduct rituals, burning incense, offering grain, pouring water in symbolic gestures. The narrator explains, religion matured alongside the city. Gods and spirits that once belonged only to trees, rivers, and storms now took on new roles: protectors of cities, guardians of harvests, arbiters of justice. Temples became not only places of faith, but centers of administration, where scribes recorded grain counts, where disputes were settled, where the people sought guidance. The camera cuts to scribes at work. On clay tablets, they press symbols with reed styluses, creating early forms of writing. The narrator speaks. This was a revolution as profound as fire or farming. Memory, once carried only in stories and rituals, could now be preserved in marks. Writing allowed the storage of contracts, harvest records, trade agreements, and myths. With each symbol, knowledge extended beyond a single lifetime, binding generations together. A new sequence shows bustling trade along the riverbank. Boats laden with grain, pottery, and woven cloth drift downstream, while merchants from distant lands arrive with obsidian, shells, and exotic spices. Hands exchange goods, voices rise in negotiation, beads and precious stones change ownership. The narrator explains that trade expanded horizons. Goods, ideas, and technologies flowed along rivers and across deserts. With trade came diplomacy, but also rivalry. The film turns to scenes of craftsmanship. Artisans shape bronze by pouring molten metal into molds, producing tools sharper and stronger than stone. Blacksmiths hammer weapons on stone anvils, sparks flying into the air. Weavers stretch brightly dyed threads across wooden looms, producing patterned cloths. Potters turn wheels with remarkable precision, shaping jars and vessels. The narrator highlights that innovation accelerated in cities, fueled by need, exchange, and experimentation. The camera slows on a classroom-like scene. An elder sits before a group of children, showing them clay tablets etched with marks. He gestures, recites, points to the symbols. The narrator explains that education became formalized. Knowledge of writing, mathematics, and astronomy was taught deliberately, ensuring that the next generation could continue the work of their elders. Astronomy, once a guide for migration, now guided planting seasons, harvest festivals, and even religious calendars. The film cuts to the city at night. Fires burn in braziers, torches line the streets, shadows flicker on mud brick walls. Music fills the air, drums, flutes, and string instruments accompanying voices raised in song. Dancers move in circles in temple courtyards, their shadows weaving like spirits across the stone. The narrator reflects, art was not separate from survival. It reinforced identity, united the community, celebrated victory, and gave solace in hardship. Music and dance synchronized human hearts as much as labor. The scene grows darker as tension builds. Outside the city walls, a rival group prepares for attack. Their fires glow on the horizon. Their shouts echo faintly across the fields. Inside, guards reinforce gates, families gather close, priests chant for protection. The narrator's voice deepens. With cities came organized warfare. Battles were no longer chaotic clashes, but calculated struggles. Strategies were drawn, alliances formed, and entire communities fought not only to survive, but to protect identity, pride, and future. A dramatic sequence follows. Arrows fly, ladders crash against walls, defenders rain down stones and boiling water. Smoke and fire engulf the night as the city trembles. But it endures. At dawn, survivors rebuild. Walls are repaired, fields cleared, wounds treated. The narrator reminds us, resilience was always humanity's greatest strength. Every attack, every disaster became another lesson. The camera shifts to quieter moments. Farmers plant new crops in neat rows. Potters fire fresh vessels. Scribes mark the tablets with records of the battle. Life continues because survival demanded continuity. In the face of chaos, routine was an anchor. The narrator reflects that cities created new social hierarchies. Farmers, artisans, priests, warriors, scribes, each had a role, each relied on the other. Power often rested with those who controlled knowledge. Priests who interpreted the stars, scribes who recorded laws, leaders who commanded armies. Yet every hand, from the humblest laborer to the highest priest, was essential to the city's endurance. The film lingers on an aerial view of the city at twilight. Smoke rises in graceful spirals, music drifts upward, walls stand firm, and the river glitters like liquid silver. Beyond the city, wilderness stretches vast and untamed, but within the walls, order pulses with life. The narrator's voice softens. From scattered bands to villages, from villages to cities, humanity had transformed. No longer just hunters, gatherers, or wanderers, they were builders of walls, writers of words, keepers of law, and dreamers of gods. In these first cities, human destiny bent toward civilization. Here, survival was no longer enough. Now, humanity sought meaning, permanence, and legacy. The camera rises higher and higher, showing multiple cities dotting the river valleys, their fires glowing like constellations across the earth. The stars above mirror the lights below, as if heaven and earth have begun to reflect one another. The screen fades slowly to black. The screen fades in from darkness. Slowly, the faint sound of flowing water grows louder. The camera glides over an immense land, flat plains carved by winding rivers. The sun rises, revealing endless fields of barley and wheat swaying in the wind. Villages cluster along the banks, but farther ahead, great cities dominate the horizon. Towering ziggurats pierce the sky, walls stretch wide, and markets teem with life. The narrator's voice rises, solemn yet vibrant. Here, in the valleys of mighty rivers, human beings did not merely survive, they flourished. They built empires of mud brick and stone, of law and ritual, of trade and discovery. They tamed rivers, mapped the stars, and dared to ask questions of the universe itself. This was the golden age of the ancient world. The camera zooms into Mesopotamia. Great canals shimmer like veins across the land, carrying water from the Tigris and Euphrates. Farmers guide plows drawn by oxen, their movements rhythmic, coordinated. The narrator explains, irrigation was the lifeblood of Mesopotamia. By channeling rivers into fields, humans transformed deserts into gardens. Surplus grain fed not only their own people, but also armies, builders, and priests. The scene shifts to Babylon. Towering walls, massive gates adorned with lions and dragons, and above all, the ziggurat, the step pyramid temple, glistening in sunlight. Inside, scribes press symbols into clay tablets. The camera closes in on their hands as wedge-shaped marks fill the surface. The narrator speaks, writing matured into cuneiform. On these tablets, rulers inscribed laws, merchants recorded contracts, priests logged celestial movements. Writing preserved memory, codified justice, and gave authority permanence. A dramatic sequence unfolds as the camera moves to King Hammurabi standing before a massive stone stele. On its surface are etched lines of text, the Code of Hammurabi. The narrator intones. This was one of the earliest known law codes. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Justice was made public, no longer the secret of kings or priests. For the first time, law sought to bind ruler and subject alike. The film shifts to a Mesopotamian observatory. Priests climb to the ziggurat's summit, where they watch the heavens. They trace the movement of planets, record eclipses, divide time into hours, days, months. The narrator explains, astronomy and mathematics were born together. Mesopotamians invented the base 60 system, giving us the 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle. Knowledge of the skies guided farmers, sailors, and kings. The scene flows like a river to Egypt. The Nile glistens beneath the blazing sun. Its floods bring black silt, renewing the land each year. The camera follows a caravan of workers, their backs bent beneath stone blocks. Slowly, immense pyramids rise against the horizon. The narrator reflects, Egypt's monuments were more than tombs. They were symbols of eternity, engineering marvels that aligned with stars and embodied the pharaoh's godlike power. A sweeping shot enters the pyramid's interior. Torches illuminate painted walls, scenes of gods, animals, and offerings. Priests chant prayers, believing the pharaoh would ascend to the afterlife as a divine being. The narrator whispers, religion in Egypt fused with science, guiding not only ritual, but also architecture, medicine, and governance. Cut to a scene of Egyptian scribes bending over papyrus scrolls. They write in hieroglyphs, recording trade records, poems, hymns, and medical texts. The narrator highlights the Ebers Papyrus, a medical text that cataloged hundreds of treatments for diseases, evidence of early medicine grounded in both observation and ritual. The camera pans to boats sailing down the Nile. Gold, linen, grain, papyrus, and exotic animals fill their decks. Foreign traders bring incense, ivory, and precious stones. Egypt, the narrator explains, was not an isolated kingdom, but a hub of trade that linked Africa, the Mediterranean, and beyond. The film transitions eastward to the Indus Valley. The camera sweeps over Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Wide streets cut across the cities in perfect grids. Multi-story houses with private wells and drainage lines line the avenues. The narrator marvels, here was urban planning beyond imagination. Their drainage systems surpassed many later civilizations. In these cities, order and cleanliness were not luxuries. They were necessities. The shot moves inside a granary where workers store surplus harvests. In workshops, artisans craft beads from carnelian, seals from steatite, and pottery with geometric designs. Merchants weigh goods on standardized stone weights. The narrator observes, this civilization valued precision, balance, and trade. Seals stamped with symbols suggest a system of writing still undeciphered, a mystery that guards their thoughts across millennia. The film follows traders leaving the Indus Valley, with carts pulled by humped cattle, their caravans stretching across deserts. They exchange cotton, beads, and spices for metals and rare woods. The narrator adds, trade bound these ancient centers together, carrying not just goods but stories, myths, and innovations. The scene shifts again, now to the Yellow River Valley of ancient China. The waters swirl violently, earning the name China's sorrow for their floods. Yet from this harsh land arose dynasties, the Jia, the Shang, the Zhou, each layer building upon the last. The camera shows bronze vessels, cast with intricate designs of dragons and beasts. Ritual fires burn, and oracle bones crack as diviners interpret messages from ancestors. The narrator speaks, in China, reverence for ancestors and harmony with heaven-shaped society. Kings ruled with the mandate of heaven, a belief that divine authority was conditional, dependent on just rule. This concept would echo through Chinese history for thousands of years. The film lingers on Chinese scholars carving symbols onto bamboo slips. Their writing system, complex and enduring, laid the foundation for centuries of literature and philosophy. Farmers toil in rice paddies, while artisans perfect silk weaving. The secrets of silk would remain China's guarded treasure, a marvel to distant lands. As the montage continues, the narrator reflects, in Mesopotamia, law and mathematics bound society. In Egypt, religion and engineering built monuments for eternity. In the Indus, order and trade sustained vast cities. In China, philosophy and tradition forged a culture of continuity. Different rivers, different lands, but all moved toward the same destiny, civilization. The film grows darker, showing drought, floods, invasions. Cities crumble, rulers fall, yet the narrator's voice steadies. No collapse erased what humanity had achieved. Knowledge, ideas, and traditions endured, carried forward by survivors. A quiet scene follows, scribes teaching children, farmers planting seeds, priests watching the stars. The narrator explains, true legacy was not monuments or kings, but the wisdom that crossed generations. The final shot rises high above the ancient world. The Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, the Yellow River, all glitter like threads of silver under the stars. The narrator concludes, from rivers came life, from life came knowledge, from knowledge came civilization. And though empires would rise and fall, what humanity built in these first golden ages would echo forever. The screen fades to black. The scene opens with a slow pan across a vast desert. The horizon trembles in the heat, and in the distance, columns of soldiers march in perfect formation. Their bronze shields glint under the sun, spears rise like a forest of metal. The narrator's voice enters, deep and steady. From the ashes of ancient river valleys rose empires of ambition. These were not mere villages clinging to rivers, but mighty realms stretching across continents. Kings and conquerors dreamed of unity. Philosophers sought truth beyond survival, and poets sang of heroes whose deeds would echo through eternity. Humanity was no longer only surviving, it was reaching for greatness. The camera cuts to Persia. The Achaemenid Empire spreads like fire across the land, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean. The shot zooms over Persepolis, its columns towering, walls carved with scenes of tribute bearers bringing gifts from every corner of the empire. Gold, ivory, horses, silk, spices, all converge here. The narrator explains, Persia created one of the first true world empires. Its genius was not only conquest but administration. The royal road, spanning thousands of miles, linked distant provinces. Couriers on horseback carried messages across the empire in days, a marvel of logistics. Governors, called satraps, ruled regions under the king's authority, ensuring order in lands of many tongues and traditions. The camera lingers on the figure of Cyrus the Great, his soldiers freeing captives rather than enslaving them. The narrator recalls, Persia practiced tolerance, allowing conquered peoples to keep their religions and customs. This vision of unity through diversity would echo in centuries to come. From Persia, the film flows westward to Greece. The screen bursts alive with the blue waters of the Aegean, dotted with islands and ships with billowing sails. The narrator speaks. Here, among rugged mountains and scattered coasts, small city-states gave birth to ideas that would shape the world forever. The camera dives into Athens. White marble columns rise toward the sky. Citizens gather in the agora, debating passionately. Democracy is born here, the narrator explains. Not kings or priests, but ordinary citizens deciding the fate of their city through speech and vote. Imperfect, limited, yet revolutionary, it was the seed of political freedom. The camera shifts to a quiet courtyard. A bearded man, Socrates, sits surrounded by students. He does not lecture, he questions. What is justice? What is virtue? His method of asking, of doubting, becomes a foundation of philosophy. The narrator continues. His student Plato would dream of an ideal republic. While Plato's student Aristotle would map logic, ethics, biology, and politics, setting frameworks that lasted millennia. Next, the film sweeps across Olympia. Athletes run, wrestle, throw javelins, cheered by crowds. The Olympic Games, born in honor of the gods, embody the Greek ideal of balance, strength of body and mind. But war shadows Greece. The scene darkens as Spartan warriors march, their discipline unshakable. The clash of Athens and Sparta erupts, the Peloponnesian War tearing apart unity. The narrator reflects, Greek brilliance burned bright, but its light was fractured by rivalry. The screen shifts to Alexander the Great. The young king charges on horseback, his armies stretching behind him. Cities fall, empires collapse, until Greece's influence spreads from Egypt to India. The narrator explains, this was the Hellenistic age, where Greek ideas mingled with Egyptian, Persian, and Indian traditions. Libraries filled with scrolls, scholars studied medicine, astronomy, mathematics. The city of Alexandria shone as the beacon of knowledge. From Greece, the camera turns to Rome. A wolf suckling twin infants fades into soldiers building roads, aqueducts, amphitheaters. The narrator intones, if Greece gave the world thought, Rome gave it power, order, and endurance. The Colosseum rises in grandeur. Gladiators clash before roaring crowds. Senators argue beneath marble pillars. Engineers guide water through aqueducts that stretch for miles, bringing life to vast cities. The narrator notes, Roman law, Roman roads, Roman governance became the backbone of Europe for centuries. Even in fall, Rome's shadow lingered. Its language, its structures, its laws survived, shaping the modern world. The film zooms into the Indian subcontinent. Vast temples rise, incense burns, chants echo across rivers and forests. The narrator speaks. Here, philosophy turned inward, searching not only for laws of nature, but for truths of the soul. The Upanishads whispered of Brahman, the eternal reality, and Atman, the soul within. The scene follows the journey of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. Under the Bodhi tree, he finds enlightenment. His teachings spread, life is suffering, suffering has causes, but liberation lies in the middle path. Monks carry these teachings across Asia, their saffron robes glowing like fire in forests and mountains. The narrator observes, Buddhism joined philosophy with compassion, building not empires of stone, but empires of mind and spirit. In India, too, empires rose. The Mauryan dynasty under Ashoka stretched wide, its ruler once a conqueror, but later a messenger of peace. Stone pillars carved with edicts stand tall, declaring tolerance, compassion, and justice. The narrator reflects, never before had an emperor turned his might toward spreading kindness instead of conquest. The film turns to China. The Yellow River Valley once more fills the screen. Amid turmoil, thinkers rose, Confucius teaching the ethics of harmony, respect, and duty. His disciples wrote down his words, creating the Analects, guiding rulers for centuries. The shot moves to Laozi, sitting beneath a tree, writing of the Tao, the way of nature, of balance, of yielding strength. The narrator whispers, Taoism sought wisdom, not in power, but in simplicity, in flowing with the universe rather than against it. The camera pans to soldiers erecting walls across mountains and plains. The Great Wall stretches like a serpent over the land. The narrator explains, in the Qin dynasty, China unified under one emperor. Harsh but enduring, it built foundations of governance, writing, and defense that would last. The film weaves together threads of all these lands. Persia's roads, Greece's philosophy, Rome's law, India's spirituality, China's ethics, each a strand in the vast tapestry of human history. The narrator concludes this scene in reverent tones. Empires rose and fell. Wars burned and peace rebuilt. Yet from Greece came reason, from Rome came law, from Persia came unity, from India came wisdom, from China came harmony. The ancient world was no longer just surviving. It was creating legacies meant for all generations. The camera soars high above the globe, stars glittering over continents. Roads, rivers, and walls glow faintly, as if the earth itself remembers the footsteps of ancestors. fade to black. The screen opens in silence. The stars fade as the first light of dawn washes over ruined stone pillars and broken temples. Vines crawl over fallen walls. Sands bury the remains of mighty empires. The narrator's voice begins, soft and contemplative. All that rises must one day fall. The empires of Persia, the brilliance of Greece, the might of Rome, the wisdom of India, the harmony of China, all would face the cycles of time. Yet their ideas, their knowledge, their spirit endured, carried forward by countless generations. Human survival had now become more than fire and food. It had become the survival of memory, of culture, of knowledge. The camera drifts over Europe after Rome's collapse. Roads crumble, cities shrink, villages scatter across forests and plains. Kings rule over small domains, castles rise against invaders, peasants toil in fields. The narrator explains, "The fall of Rome did not end civilization, it transformed it." In monasteries, monks copied manuscripts by candlelight, preserving the words of Plato, Aristotle, and the scriptures. Across the deserts of Arabia, a new flame of knowledge was about to ignite. The scene shifts to the Middle East. The city of Baghdad glows beneath starlight, its domes and minarets shimmering like jewels. Inside the House of Wisdom, scholars gather. They translate Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. They calculate, measure, observe the heavens. Algebra is born, medicine advances, navigation tools emerge. The narrator reflects, "Here in the Islamic Golden Age, knowledge became a bridge between worlds." From India came numerals. From Greece philosophy, from Persia medicine, from China paper, and from these threads a new fabric of science was woven. The camera pans to caravans crossing the Silk Road. Traders move silk. Spices, gold, and books across deserts and mountains. Ideas travel with them. Buddhism reaches China. Paper travels west. Gunpowder follows. Compasses guide ships. Humanity is now more connected than ever before. The film shifts to medieval Europe. Cathedrals rise, stained glass burns with colors. Knights ride to crusades, while farmers turn soil with heavy plows. The narrator explains, even in hardship, innovation grew. Crop rotations, windmills, and new ships slowly built the foundation for change. Suddenly, the screen darkens. The Black Death sweeps across cities. Bodies lie in the streets, bells toll mournfully. The narrator whispers, survival was once again tested. A third of Europe fell to the plague. Yet even in despair, humanity learned. Quarantine, public health, and medical inquiry emerged. From tragedy grew resilience. The camera shifts to Florence, to the heart of the Renaissance. The city bursts with life. Painters stretch canvases. Sculptors carve marble into gods. Scientists sketch the anatomy of the human body. The narrator's voice rises. Here the spirit of curiosity returned with fire. Leonardo dreamed of flying machines. Michelangelo carved eternity into stone. Gutenberg's press spread words to millions, breaking the chains of ignorance. The Renaissance was not survival, it was rebirth. The film races forward into the age of exploration. Ships cut through waves, sails full of wind. Columbus sights land, Vasco da Gama reaches India, Magellan's fleet circles the globe. The narrator explains, once humans followed rivers and stars to survive. Now they crossed oceans to expand their horizons. The world was no longer a collection of isolated lands. It was one vast, connected stage. The screen turns to scientists gazing through telescopes, holding strange instruments. Galileo maps the stars. Newton writes his laws of motion. Copernicus dares to place the sun at the center. The narrator intones. The scientific revolution was fire rekindled. Knowledge forged from questioning, from daring to doubt. With science, humans gained mastery not only over nature, but over ignorance itself. The camera sweeps into factories of the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines roar, smoke billows, wheels turn endlessly. Workers swarm, machines pound, locomotives scream across landscapes. The narrator explains, once survival meant firewood and stone tools. Now coal and iron drove civilization. The Industrial Revolution transformed human life, bringing power, medicine, transport, and new challenges. Survival was no longer about hunting or farming alone. It was about adapting to a world of relentless change. The film moves to cities glowing with electricity, telegraph lines buzzing, early airplanes rising into the sky. The narrator's voice deepens. Our ancestors lit fires with sparks from stone. We lit cities with lightning harnessed from the earth. We crossed rivers by foot. We now crossed continents in hours. The screen flashes with images of wars, cannons firing, tanks rolling, mushroom clouds rising. The narrator pauses, solemn. But with power came peril. The 20th century tested humanity not only with survival of the body, but of conscience. 2 world wars scarred the earth. Yet even in ruin, humans rebuilt. They sought peace. They reached for the stars. They dreamed again. The film shows astronauts on the moon, Earth rising behind them. Satellites orbit the globe, computers hum, DNA spirals glow on screens. The narrator speaks with awe. From caves to cosmos, from embers to electricity, from stories whispered by firelight to data carried on invisible waves. This is the journey of survival turned into civilization. The final montage begins. A child in Africa drinking clean water from a well. A scientist in a lab developing medicine. Farmers guiding tractors under the sun. Families gathered around dinner tables across the world. Astronomers pointing telescopes toward galaxies far beyond. The narrator's final words rise, steady and eternal. Every comfort we hold today, every light, every meal, every home was once a desperate struggle. Our ancestors fought cold with fire, hunger with knowledge of plants, danger with unity, darkness with stories. Their survival tricks became our culture, our science, our civilization. We are their children carrying their flame. And though the world has changed, the truth remains. To survive is to adapt, to learn, to remember. This is the legacy of humankind, the story of us all. The camera pulls back, higher and higher, until Earth itself floats in the blackness of space. Its blue oceans shimmer, its continents glow faintly with the light of cities. Stars burn all around, eternal witnesses to humanity's journey. The screen fades to black. A single ember glows, flickers, and goes out. Silence.